Hello, today we're going to show you how we here at Modern Quilt Studio bind our quilts using a simple one-step top-stitched binding method. The first part of the video will show you how to make the binding itself, and then the second half will show you how we actually put it on our quilts.
I want to show you how to prepare the binding to do the Modern Quilt Studio binding method. You'll need to figure out the perimeter length of the quilt you want to bind. So you're going to add up all of the measurements of each of the four sides of the quilt and then divide that by 40 if you're doing selvage to selvage cuts. We do selvage to selvage cuts for our binding because we're not going around curves, so we don't really need the bias. The binding made on the bias. If you prefer to use it to make your quilting binding on the bias, you can use this method for that as well. But you'll need 2-inch strips. So my quilt is 118 inches, so divided by 40, that gives me three strips that I need to be able to bind the quilt. So let me tell you what you're going to need. You're going to need the correct number of 2-inch strips, selvage to selvage, for the perimeter measurement of your quilt. You're going to need a piece of chalk or a marking pen, some pins, a Clover bias tape maker. We use the 25mm or 1-inch version. It comes in many widths. A pair of scissors and an iron. So let me get started, and I want to show you specifically how to do it with a solid, which is a little more tricky because the right and wrong sides aren't as clear. However, if you don't mark the correct side for a solid, you might end up with seams on the outside of one section of the binding tape. So I'll show you how I like to mark it. And I fold back each strip just a little bit, and I make a line because you're going to be washing the finished quilt anyway, I'm assuming. And I'm going to make a line so both ends of the strips you're using will have a mark on it, so you can make sure that correct sides are sewn together. So then the next thing we're going to do is pin them together. And I'm going to take this chalk side up, and I'm going to take the end of another strip, chalk side down, so we have right sides together. And I'm going to pin them at a 90-degree angle. So there's one end, and then here's the other end. Let's find that chalk mark. There's the chalk mark. So I'm going to pin it right sides together on this one as well at a 90-degree angle. Now you'll see a little bit of the selvage holes here in the selvage. That's going to be cut off, so don't worry about that. You don't need to trim off the selvage before you go pinning them together. Okay, now let's sew this together. So once you've put it under the presser foot, you're going to be looking on that corner that you were, where the two were overlapped, and you're going to be aiming for this corner here, right there, and to join the strips together. Now you don't need to cut your thread at this point. You can just feed the next one in, and then you'll be able to trim them all down at the same time. And again, you're going to start at this corner. You're going to start right here, and you're going to end up right here. Okay. So now what you're going to want to do is trim off a seam allowance of about 1/4 inch. You can eyeball that on that one and on this one. Okay, now let's go press it. Once you have your binding piece together, you want to start putting it through the Clover bias tape maker by just cutting off the end of the binding to make sure that you have a point that you can feed through the bias tape maker. So you're going to feed it through this end of the tool, and it's going to come out. You can see just that little piece that comes out there, and you're going to pull that just gently enough to get it to the point where you can see those raw edges in the middle. You're going to make sure that the raw edges are exactly in the middle, and you can see right here there's a little line, and I like those raw edges to align with that little line on the tool. So once you've got those raw edges in the center, just use the tip of the iron to stabilize them. And so then you can begin pulling. So I typically like to start with my right hand holding the iron and my left hand pulling the tool. And you're just going to keep sliding and sliding the iron. And you're going to pay attention to the raw edges of the piece falling in the center exactly. And once you've done a little bit of a length, sometimes I like to put a pin here to anchor it. And then you'll be able to do a length, gliding really easily. And then when you kind of run out of room on your ironing board, you can advance the pin down. So I want to get you to that point where the seam with the other strip is, let me advance this back a little bit, there we go. And I want you to see how it's going to look when you go over that bump where the two strips are sewn together. Okay, so here we are. And you can see that when you open this up here, sometimes they're folded over to one side. In this case, they're still open. That's the way you want them. You want to make sure they're open because otherwise it'll be really bulky when you actually attach the binding to the quilt. So in this case, we'll be able to just check. We checked that was okay. And we're just going to keep going. If you find that the fabric you're using is a little too floppy, maybe it's a looser weave, or there's a lot of humidity in the air, sometimes I like to use this best press, and I can just spritz a little bit of it on, and it gives you a bit of a, it's kind of like a starch feel to it, which I think makes it a little bit easier, to attach it to the quilt. So if you're struggling at all with this technique, this can help you get the binding a little bit stiffer. And you just keep going until you've gotten this 1 inch width for the entire length. Now once you've gotten that, everything is the entire length of it looks like this. Now is the really critical part, that you fold it over, pressing as you go. You want to make sure that this folded side and this folded side are aligned directly on top of each other, because otherwise when you put it on, when you wrap it around the quilt, you might not catch it on the back because you're going to be doing one seam that catches the top and bottom. And if those two edges aren't aligned, you're not going to catch it on both sides. So you're going to fold it over very carefully. Take your time with this. You don't need to hurry. And you're just going to keep folding and pressing as you go. And again, this best press is really helpful if you're having a hard time keeping it. Whoops, let's try this direction. So I'm folding a little bit at a time. Depending on your iron, some people find that you might want to turn down your steam function if it's a little too hot on your fingers. I don't mind too much. and you're going to keep going. But you can see that the fold is absolutely, these edges are aligned. So that way when you're wrapping it around your quilt and you're sewing, it'll catch both sides equally.